I let my sister-in-law, my sworn enemy, take my son on a cousin's day out. The truce shattered when her daughter called me, crying, "Mom said it's a prank, but he won't wake up." The fallout from her cruel game still makes her shiver. A web of resentment for 6 years, since I married my husband, Jay. My relationship with his family has been a tapestry woven with tension and misunderstanding. Jay, at 33, and I, 32, have a 4-year-old son, Egon. Yes, we're Game of Thrones fans, a detail I always found more amusing than the source of their disapproval. The friction stemmed from our different backgrounds. They were deeply religious, whereas I am agnostic. This difference, to them, was a chasm, and they mistakenly believed I had led Jay away from his faith, a decision he had made long before he and I ever met. Despite the initial chill, things began to thaw after Egon was born. My mother-in-law, in particular, made an effort. We spent more time together, and as we did, we found a fragile bridge of understanding. We learned to see each other's perspectives, and the sharp edges of our disagreements began to soften. My father-in-law, a man of quiet reserve, remained largely unbothered by the family drama. He has always treated me with respect and, most importantly, has never meddled in our affairs. With Egon, they were both completely smitten, doting on their grandson and relishing every moment with him. The icy atmosphere of the early days was replaced with something warmer, and seeing how much this meant to Jay, who had always been close to his parents, was a comfort. The real trouble, it turned out, lay not with my in-laws, but with Jay's older sister, Joanna. At 40, she was navigating a personal crisis. Her husband had left her 2 years prior after discovering she was having an affair. The divorce had been messy, and he had fought relentlessly for custody of their 5-year-old daughter, Rachel, ultimately only securing her for weekends. It was a difficult time for everyone, and while neither Jane nor I condoned Joanna's actions, we knew we had to support her. In a sincere attempt to help, I offered to watch Rachel while Joanna sorted through the legal chaos and searched for a new home and a job. It seemed a simple solution. Egon and Rachel were close in age, and the company would be good for both of them. For a month, Joanna would drop Rachel off in the mornings, and the cousins would spend the day together, forming an inseparable bond. When Joanna finally got her own place and took Rachel to live with her full-time, the little girl was heartbroken. Joanna, however, perceived this as a personal slight, convinced that Rachel preferred me to her. I tried to explain that Rachel's attachment was to Egon and the fun they had together, not a reflection of a flawed relationship with her own mother. I even suggested arranging regular playdates, but my words fell on deaf ears. Joanna's emotions were a tangled mess, and she lashed out, accusing me of trying to steal her daughter. It was then that Jay stepped in, bluntly reminding her that she should be grateful for our help, not hostile. This only soured things further, and Joanna pulled away, cutting off contact. The rift was painful, especially for the children, who missed each other. What Joanna didn't know was that her ex-husband, Noel, was secretly bringing Rachel to our house on weekends so the cousins could still play. It was a fragile secret, one we knew a 5-year-old wouldn't be able to keep forever, but we were willing to risk it for their happiness. When the secret finally came out, the explosion was inevitable. My in-laws had to intervene, pleading with Joanna to stop her petty vendetta and think about her daughter's well-being. Eventually, she relented, and the playdates resumed. Rachel and Egon were like 2 peas in a pod, a blessing I cherished, especially since Jay and I had decided we would only have one child. They took turns visiting each other's homes, and our families fell into a comfortable rhythm. Looking back, I had no idea the resentment Joanna still harbored. I failed to see the danger lurking beneath her forced civility. Yesterday, everything changed. Jay was out of town, and my in-laws were on vacation. A sudden, intense fever and nausea left me weak and bedridden. It was Rachel's turn to come over, but I knew I couldn't handle 2 small children in my state. I called Joanna to cancel, and to my surprise she offered to take Egon for the day and even have him for a sleepover so I could rest. Her kindness was so unexpected that I was genuinely touched. I gratefully accepted, believing she had finally put aside her animosity. A few hours later, still in a feverish sleep, I was jolted awake by a phone call. It was Joanna. On the other end, I heard Egon's panicked crying, a sound that made my blood run cold. His body was covered in hives, his face and eyes swollen. Panic seized me, and I rushed him to the emergency room, my mind a storm of fear and rage. At the hospital, as the doctors asked about Egon's allergies, I confirmed his severe nut allergy. Joanna, who had accompanied us, insisted Egon hadn't eaten anything with nuts. But then Rachel, with tears streaming down her face, spoke the words that turned my world to ash. "Mommy gave him my peanut butter sandwich, even when I told her he couldn't eat it." I saw red. In a moment of pure, blinding fury, I lunged forward and slapped Joanna. Nurses quickly intervened as she tried to retaliate. Rachel, sobbing uncontrollably, clung to my leg. I knew I couldn't let the girl go home with her mother, not when Joanna's rage was so palpable. I called Noel and asked him to come to the hospital immediately. When he arrived, he took one look at us and understood the gravity of the situation. With Egon stabilized and under observation overnight, Noel, Joanna, Rachel, and I went to a quiet diner to talk. I wanted to hear Joanna's side of the story, but she remained silent, glaring at Rachel. Noel, however, urged his daughter to be honest. As Joanna tried to create a scene, calling her own child a liar, Rachel finally relented. She explained that Joanna had given her money to buy sandwiches. Rachel bought peanut butter, Egon bought jam. When Egon asked for a bite of hers, she said no, reminding him of his allergy. Joanna, seeing Egon look sad, accused Rachel of being a greedy little child and snatched the sandwich from her. Despite Rachel's desperate pleas and reminders of Egon's allergy, Joanna said it was a harmless prank and forced the sandwich into his mouth. By then, both children were crying. Hearing this, I had to physically restrain myself. I looked at Joanna, but she refused to explain herself, scoffing at the idea that I would believe a child over a grown woman. My exhaustion finally overtook me. I warned her that I would consider Rachel's version the truth and that Jay would not be so forgiving. She scoffed once more, but a flicker of fear crossed her face when I mentioned Jay's name. I walked out, leaving her to deal with Noel and Rachel. I called Jay and told him everything. He was furious and immediately booked a flight home. Jay returned the next day, and we brought a tired, but otherwise fine, Egon home from the hospital. Jay was resolute. There was nothing to talk to Joanna about. He saw this not as a mistake, but as a deliberate, malicious act. He told me that we needed to stop thinking of her as family because she had proven she was dangerous. We decided the best course of action was to report her. The final push came from Noel, who, during a tense conversation, had secretly recorded Joanna confessing to everything. The recording was a raw, heartbreaking display of guilt, with Joanna sobbing, I'm sorry," while admitting she had done it out of spite. We called Child Protective Services, explaining our fears for Rachel's safety. They took the matter seriously, and a few days later, Joanna sent a scathing text message. She had been visited by the police and now knew we were behind it. The message was dark and threatening, and Jay, in a cold fury, blocked her. Finally, we showed the recording to my in-laws. My father-in-law was livid, apologizing for his initial doubt. My mother-in-law, however, still seemed to harbor sympathy for Joanna's situation, a reaction that I still can't quite understand. Ultimately, CPS removed Rachel from Joanna's care and placed her permanently with Noel. It was a chaotic, emotionally draining process that led to a final, bitter revelation. Joanna's desperation to retain custody wasn't out of love, but because she depended on the substantial child support payments to fund her lifestyle. Rachel, who had been having nightmares, was now in therapy. She still blames herself for what happened, and I try my best to reassure her. She even made us sorry cards, which I will treasure forever. Joanna, however, continued her campaign of harassment. After being blocked from contacting Jay and me, she tried to use my mother-in-law as a go-between, a role she swiftly rejected. The situation reached a breaking point when Joanna tried to take Rachel from school. The school, already aware of the custody issues, immediately contacted Noel. Now, Noel is considering a restraining order. It's a sad end to a twisted story, but Joanna has left us no choice. She has proven that for her, her own selfish desires are more important than the safety of her children.